Did you know that about 40% of Americans identify as independents? That's a shocking statistic that shows how many people feel disconnected from the traditional political parties. In today's world, politics is no longer just about being on the left or right. Many voters are looking for something different, something that resonates with their real-life experiences. Here's another eye-opener. A study from Pew Research Center found that only 27% of Americans trust the government to do what's right most of the time. This distrust is driving people to rethink their political beliefs. They want more than just a simple choice between Democrats and Republicans. They crave options that reflect their diverse views and concerns. So, what if the way we think about politics needs a major overhaul? What if the spectrum we've used for decades is outdated? In this video, we'll dive deep into these questions. We'll explore how the left-right divide is becoming less relevant and how identity, global issues, and new ideologies are reshaping the political landscape. Prepare for a journey that will challenge your views and spark new ideas. By the end, you'll see politics in a whole new light, and you might just rethink where you stand in this complex world. Let's uncover the surprising truths behind the political spectrum together. Chapter 1: The Left versus Right Myth. Breaking the binary. Most people still cling to the idea that politics is a simple left versus right battle. But that's not really the case anymore. In fact, it's never been that straightforward. The political spectrum, as we know it, was first popularized during the French Revolution. It was a quick way to divide people into two camps, revolutionaries on the left, monarchists on the right. Simple, right? But times have changed, and politics isn't that black and white anymore. For instance, let's take Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. On the surface, they seem to represent two ends of the spectrum. But both have strong populist movements that challenge elites and establishment politics. In other words, they share a similar strategy even though they differ on policy. This overlap is where the traditional spectrum starts to break down. Even data backs this up. According to a 2018 Pew Research survey, 55% of Americans believe neither political party represents their interests. If the spectrum made sense, shouldn't more people feel aligned? The truth is, people's beliefs are more scattered than the simple left-right divide suggests. And that's a big reason why third parties are becoming more popular, with independent voters making up over 40% of the electorate in 2021. Instead of thinking of politics as a flat line, imagine it more like a web. You have economic, social, cultural, and global issues all crisscrossing each other. Someone might be conservative on fiscal issues but progressive when it comes to social values. That's a lot more complicated than just left or right. And that's why politicians often adopt hybrid strategies to appeal to different voter bases. Think of it this way: focusing only on left versus right is like describing music with just two notes. Politics, like music, is made up of multiple layers and harmonies. This is where politicians like Sanders and Trump excel. They don't just focus on one note, they play the entire chord. Don't forget to subscribe. If you want to keep exploring these thought-provoking ideas, hit that subscribe button and join our journey into the world of politics. Chapter 2: Beyond the Labels. How ideologies overlap. Ever wonder why some policies seem to get support from both sides of the spectrum? That's because there are often surprising overlaps in ideologies. For example, both progressives and libertarians tend to agree on privacy rights and anti-surveillance policies. On the flip side, both sides might oppose things like monopolies but for completely different reasons. Libertarians dislike government intervention, while progressives worry about corporate greed. This strategy, appealing to overlapping ideologies, is a powerful political tool. Politicians can rally different voter groups without alienating their base. It's like threading a needle. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rand Paul, for example, once co-sponsored a bill to limit U.S. military action. Two very different ideologies, but they found common ground on foreign policy. This type of political overlap isn't just limited to the US either. Globally, you see movements that blend left-wing social policies with right-wing economic ideas. For instance, Sweden is known for its strong welfare state, but it also has a booming free market economy. It's proof that politics can blend in ways that challenge traditional labels. Even big businesses understand the power of ideological overlap. According to a 2020 survey from Edelman, 56% of consumers will boycott companies based on their political stance, yet nearly the same percentage prefer brands that take a stand on social issues. Brands have realized they can support social justice while maintaining a pro-business image. This is a blend of left-wing activism and right-wing capitalism that works for them. So, next time you hear someone complain about the other side, consider this: the lines aren't as clear as they seem. Politicians, and even corporations, are getting smarter at navigating the middle ground. It's all about adopting the right strategy to connect with different groups at once. Chapter 3: The spectrum is a circle. Radical ends meet. Here's a fun fact: the political spectrum is less like a straight line and more like a horseshoe. The idea, known as the horseshoe theory, suggests that the far left and the far right are not as different as they think. Instead, their extreme positions often lead to similar outcomes. For example, both far left and far right movements have a strong distrust of big institutions, whether it's government or corporations. Take the rise of authoritarianism, for instance. Extreme left-wing regimes, like Venezuela's, and far-right ones, like Hungary's, both seek control over media and clamp down on opposition. They use similar methods, despite coming from different ideological starting points. This is also why some radical groups sometimes collaborate, despite their differences. For example, during anti-globalization protests, anarchists from both ends of the spectrum will often work together. Why? Because they both oppose what they see as corporate power over governments. It's a strange alliance, but it's one based on common enemies. Strategies that exploit this overlap have shown up in modern politics too. Steve Bannon, Trump's former strategist, once remarked in an interview that left-wing populists and right-wing populists are just about the same. Both appeal to working-class voters who feel left behind by the political elite. This overlap is intentional. Bannon, and others like him, use populism to pull voters from different ends of the spectrum into one group. Even historical movements show this pattern. George Orwell, in his book Homage to Catalonia, wrote about how the far left and far right often converge on tactics, even if their end goals differ. He noticed that both extremes sought to suppress individual freedoms for the greater good, whether that be state control or ethnic purity. Ultimately, it's not about where you fall on the political spectrum, but how much control you want the government to have. The farther you go to the edges, the more likely you are to see similar strategies of control and suppression. So next time someone tells you that far left and far right are opposites, remind them, the spectrum is a circle, and at the extremes, things look surprisingly similar. Chapter 4: Identity Politics. A new dimension to the spectrum. Identity politics has added a new dimension to the political spectrum that wasn't there before. In the past, political debates focused mostly on economics and government size. Now, conversations about race, gender, and sexuality have taken center stage. Politicians and political movements are adjusting their strategies to cater to these identity groups because they've realized how powerful they can be. For instance, the Democratic Party has increasingly relied on coalitions of minority voters, women, and LGBTQ+ communities. Meanwhile, some conservative movements have tapped into white identity politics, framing themselves as defenders of traditional values. This shift has redefined how people align themselves politically. Rather than thinking in terms of left or right, voters are often looking at who represents their identity and values the best. The strategy of focusing on identity isn't just a trend, it's effective. A 2019 study by Pew Research Center found that 70% of Democratic voters believe that increasing racial and ethnic diversity makes America stronger. Meanwhile, many Republican voters feel that American culture is being lost in the process. These stark differences in views on identity are now a key dividing line in politics. In fact, some argue that identity politics is shaping our political landscape more than traditional economic issues. Politicians who can successfully connect with identity groups often gain loyal voter bases. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, is a master at using social media to connect with young, progressive voters. She speaks directly to their concerns about race, gender equality, and economic justice. Her rise in politics shows just how powerful identity-driven strategies can be. But identity politics isn't just a left-wing phenomenon. The right is using identity politics too. Donald Trump built a huge part of his political success on appealing to voters who felt that their identity as white, working-class Americans was under attack. In his book White Identity Politics, author Ashley Jardina writes, Trump's message tapped into deep anxieties about cultural change. This shows how identity can fuel political movements on both sides of the spectrum. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the political spectrum. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more engaging content.